Hi, I'm Jack ReVelle, and this is Continuous Improvement. Continuous Improvement TV, CITV. We're going to be on for the next year or two, however long you'll let us, from 11 to 1 Eastern Time on the second Monday of each month. And each event presentation will be a different guest. Today, we're very fortunate to have an extra special guest, Mr. Michael Brassard. Mike is from Goal QPC, a leading-edge TQM research, study, teaching organization in Methuen, Massachusetts. And he'll be talking to us about something that he is probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the United States, and that is the 7 management and planning tools. Before we get to Mike, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes of your time to talk about the show, talk about CITV. And the first thing I'd like to mention is that this is an interactive show. From time to time, showing up on your screen, there'll be a telephone number. We would encourage you to call that telephone number that you see on the screen right now. If you've got any questions for Mike or myself, we'll be able to hear you here in the studio, and the folks out there who are watching will also be able to hear you. And Mike and I will try and respond as best we can to your questions as we are on the air on an interactive basis, real time. We would look forward to any questions that you might have to either Mike or myself relative to today's topic, and that is the 7 management and planning tools. Supplemental to that, anytime during the show that you'd like to call in, not necessarily to come on the air, but simply to let us know how we're doing. Either give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. In the statistical world, we call that attribute data. Let us know how we're doing. Mayor Ed Koch from New York years ago used to walk around the city and ask his folks, the electorate, how am I doing? And we'd like to know too. So in an effort to maintain a focus on continuous improvement, please let us know how we're doing. Call in periodically, once, twice, as many times as you'd like during the show, and let us know how we're doing. And also, last reason for calling in, we'd like to know who you would like our future guests to be. Now, let me take a quick moment to tell you who our guests will be the remainder of 1995. You've probably seen this brochure on the Continuous Improvement TV series. Let me go through with you and share with you who our guests will be after today. Next month, on August 8th, we'll have Pat Riley, the founder and chairman emeritus of the Council for Continuous Improvement. He'll be talking about building a national learning environment with continuous improvement. I would encourage you to come and watch. Pat is a super guy, a very articulate, very clever person. On September 12th, good friend Greg Watson, VP for Xerox Quality Solutions, will be talking to us about a dual role application for benchmarking as a management practice and as a quality practice. As I'm sure many of you out there watching know, Greg is the author of several books on the subject of benchmarking. In October 10th to be specific, a legend in his own time, Dorian Shainin, will talk to us about gating world-class quality with statistical engineering. A real coup for us here on CITV. Dorian is somebody very, very special. In my mind, one of the top 3 most knowledgeable people in the country in the area of design of experiments. And finally, concluding the series for the last half of 1994 will be Dr. George Labovitz. Dr. Labovitz is the chairman and CEO of a worldwide consulting firm known as Organizational Dynamics Incorporated, ODI. He's also a professor of management at Boston University. He founded ODI about 20 years ago, and he's going to come to us and talk to us about his new book on the subject of quality. His topic is linking your TQM process to your business objectives. So we have a very full agenda for the remainder of 1994, but that is for future events. What I'd like to do now is talk to you about Michael Brassard. Mike, from a personal perspective, has an undergraduate degree in political science, has a master's in public administration from the University of Rhode Island. For the last 15 years, he has been a critically important member of the Goal QPC team. In that capacity, he's been doing a number of different things, least of all of which is as Director of Product Development for Gold QPC, in which he was responsible for the development of some publications known worldwide now as the Memory Jogger, the Memory Jogger Plus, the Memory Jogger Plus video series, the Memory Jogger Plus software, and the brand new Memory Jogger 2. Mike will be talking to us about those publications, as well as some other related publications that are being published by Goal. And he additionally has the responsibility for conducting the annual Goal QPC conference, which here in 1994 will be in November in Boston. If Mike has any particular comments he wants to make about that during the course of our discussion, I'm sure he will. Having said all that, I think it's time to turn our attention to our primary focus, and that's one of the good guys, Michael Brassard. Mike, welcome to CITV.
Great to be here.
It's terrific to have you here. If you would, I think it might be appropriate to get started talking about the basics of the 7 management and planning tools, their purposes, their processes, their applications, things like that. Why don't you kind of give us an overview flavor of the tools, and we'll discuss them as we go along. I'll ask some naive type questions just to reflect, what little I know.
Well, let's first of all, it really is great to be here, and I appreciate.
It's great to be anywhere, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's great to be alive. I appreciate being here. In terms of talking about how we can get the most value out of what I think are some very important methods, and let me just give it maybe a little bit of history. We ran into the 7 management planning tools back in the early 80s when we were trying to figure out a way in which we could make the total quality process more a part of everyday life. And what happened was when we went to Japan and found out what was really being developed as being a leading edge way to integrate total quality, these things called the 7 new tools for QC came up, and we had no idea what they were. But what it turned out was back in the early 70s is that there was a Japanese research committee of about 60 people from academia and from businesses who put together the best in class of tools that could be used throughout organizations to take total quality, or TQC in the Japanese context, and bust it out of the manufacturing environment and get it in throughout the organization. And so, as is customary with their research, is that they came up with what was being used in various disciplines and boiled it down to this list of 7. And so when we translated it, we literally were looking for ways in which we could make it even easier. And this was back in '83 or '84. So I've been teaching and working with these tools for about 10 years. So what I'd like to do is, if we could focus, we're not going to focus on the mechanics today. I'd like to get past that. Not that that's not important, but I'd like to look at more related to purpose. Because then we can say, what questions are we trying to ask? Because one of the things that I'm empathetic is managers are being pummeled by tools, and they're being pummeled by, this is a better way to manage, this is a better thing to do, when in fact we need to give them helpful guidance as well. So let's just take a picture or a snapshot, and this is in the materials that you have back in your site, and this will start on page 1. And don't get overwhelmed by this. We're going to kind of walk through this, but I'm going to focus on not only what are the tools themselves, for example, what is the interrelationship digraph, what is the affinity diagram, and give some definition, but I'm also going to talk about how these things can link together. Because as you know, things can be used individually, but they can also be used with real good effect in combination.
Absolutely.
So let's just take a quick look at the first one, which will be the affinity diagram here, and which clearly states that it's a creative process, which it is, which is going to identify some dominant themes in the discussion. So let's take a look at, on page 2, just very briefly, the question that's being answered by the affinity. And the key question that we need to focus on is the major themes surrounding an issue. Oftentimes it's very difficult to know where do we start in a very difficult process. And so getting past that initial block is going to be a real stickler for a lot of groups.
Mike, is there any rule of thumb that you might offer our viewers relative to how many minor themes or minor issues you might want to have before you consider using the affinity diagram?
Sure. The range that I generally suggest is about maybe 25 to maybe 125. That's an average. And what's been surprising to me, as I think we were talking the other day, is that how useful even smaller affinities with, let's say, 20, 25, 30 items, where you think it might not be necessary, but oftentimes you really just have to see what surfaces from it. But I've seen, the largest that I've seen is about 400.
Wow.
So that's called mother of all affinities. It's a big one. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that more is better, but that oftentimes you're so inundated with possibilities, it appears to be chaotic.
It sounds to me like if you've got 400 or 500, you may have to do sub-affinities.
Yeah, and I think also you got to look for redundancies. I mean, clearly in 400 or 500 items, you've got some redundancies. So the one thing I think people need to think about is that that's not a typical one. Okay. I think, you know, they're saying, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be buried in this thing.
It's like QFD matrices of 200 by 500. Right. You know, it can be done, but that's really pushing the state of the art.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the affinity diagram is, in itself, makes sense out of disparate language information. And the word disparate is important because oftentimes we have things that don't appear to be connected. But there is a natural connection, and we just can't identify what that is. And what we're going to do is rewrite it on cards, on Post-its in this case, and we're going to group those cards based on natural relationships, and then have headings for each grouping with a summary statement. So if you can picture a variety of ideas that are arrayed in front of you, and literally they appear to have no connection except in response to a central question. And then what the group is going to do is, in silence, sort that into groupings, vertical columns of like items. And what really comes out of that is that each of the group is going to have a new view of the issue emerge from the process. Sure. So that word emerge is very important, because what you don't want to have is, when you're dealing with something new, you don't want to have the old thinking dictate what is going to be the new pattern of thinking. So you're going to let these things emerge naturally. Okay. Now the summary statement, the header card, is where you really get the added value. Is because now what you're doing is like an idea still. You're pouring all of these contents in, and then you're letting these things bubble up, and then you're giving it a name. But in the giving it a name in a rich, full statement, you oftentimes capture the essence of what's there. And that's what you're really after.
I'm sure that many of our viewers have used affinity analysis and are finding what you're describing to be of tremendous value. But I also suspect there are some people out there that, while they may have heard or even not heard of affinity analysis, have never seen it done. Are you going to be able to give us some examples of actual usage of this, so they can see the bringing together of these emerging themes?
Sure. Would you want to do that now? Would you like to look at an actual example?
That'd be great.
Okay. We'll be looking at a tape a little bit later that shows that in action. But if you could turn to page 25 of your materials, this is going to be the deck that we're going to be shuffling. So as questions come up from Jack or from yourself, we'll be trying to reference this as much as possible. This is going to be, on page 25, is actually from the new Jogger 2, Memory Jogger 2.
For the folks who haven't seen that, let me put this down right on top of that. This is the new book. It's, as you can see, the Memory Jogger 2. You know, that's like deuce. This I just had the opportunity to see for the first time at the ASQC Quality Congress in Las Vegas about a month ago, and I've got to tell you, I think you've outdone yourself in this particular book. I see that it's got not only the 7M tools in there, but the 7QC tools from the original Memory Jogger, and some additional tools as well. Sure. You've got what in there, what, 25, 30 different tools? And the format is outstanding. Let me find a typical page. Like, here's the interrelationship digraph. Talk about getting lucky. If you can focus in on that real tight over here, there we go. There's an interrelationship digraph, and we have a close-up of it. I think on the previous page, on the previous pages we've got some examples of the interrelationship digraph, and the whole thing starts out with a description of how this whole thing works. Some tools have only 2 or 3 pages. Right. Some have more, some have less. But as far as I'm concerned, I won't walk through an operation without having this in my pocket. This is good stuff.
No.
Okay, forgive me for pushing that.
No, that's fine. No, and I appreciate it. I can talk a little bit more about what's included, what's different than been in the past. But the important thing on the affinity is that you start off with something that means something for the organization. And in this case, this is, by the way, an example from Goodyear.
Oh, so this is a real one?
Oh, yeah, this is from Goodyear Tire and Rubber. And the issue was stated right here, surrounding the implementation of the business plan.
Let's see, they can't see that.
Okay.
There we go.
The issues surrounding the implementation of the business plan. Now, the important thing on this is that they start off with something that has been something that they've been less than satisfied with over the years. They want to do a better job. Like I think all of us can empathize with that with business planning. And all of these items here represent the individual wisdom, the individual input of this core team that put this together. Now, based upon that, and these groupings simply represent the linking of like items together. Now, these items here are the header cards that are going to synthesize. They're going to synthesize these, what these things all have in common. And you'll notice that there are some higher levels and lower levels of detail. For example, if we could focus right in here, this one is what's called a subheader, plan not integrated, and this one here is called planning approach not standardized. That is summarized under a broader header called our business planning approach must be improved. And so all of this really defines what's the essence of the issue or the consensus of the group. So what that has emerged from that's emerged from the consensus of the individual issues and then what the larger issue is. Now, if you can think about that in relationship to meetings that we've had, for instance, if you've been on a business retreat, and you have a two-day retreat and you spend the first day and a half talking about what are the major issues that we should be talking about in the 2 days. And you find out that what you've done is that you've had a real difficult time coming to consensus around major things. So anyway, this is an example. This is not an unusual example. This probably has about 40 Post-its to it or so. And by the way, I will be talking about Post-its often, and I don't own stock in 3M, and maybe I should.
Yeah, that's a trademark term.
Yes, it is, and it's one of those things where the portability of the notes, of the notepads, really makes it very helpful.
I understand you don't have to use yellow Post-its. You can use any color Post-its.
Well, it's very versatile.
Oh, good.
We can even change colors midstream.
That's like technology transfer.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Would you like me to continue on with each of the tools?
Yeah, if you would. I think that'd be terrific.
Okay.
And then follow each one up with a kind of an example. Okay. As you just did.
No, that's fine. So if we come into the interrelationship diagram for the ID, which is the second one. And oftentimes the ID, kind of looks like a model of the inside of a molecule, and people get overwhelmed by it. But in fact, it's quite simple. So let's look at what the question is. The question is, what are the issues that we should work on first, and how will we measure success? So what you're really looking for is drivers. You're looking for leverage. That's the key word. In all problem solving and planning, you're looking for leverage. So what is the ID? It identifies causal relationships between ideas and issues. The process reveals patterns of cause and effect, which are primary causes and major results, key outcomes, surrounding an issue. Now,
so what you're really looking for, if I understand correctly, is those particular issues that have the majority of outputs or the majority of inputs. These are the key factors that have lots of ins and outs as opposed to just one or two.
Yeah, and you're asking that of everything as it relates to everything.
Right.
So what you're doing is you're making individual judgments, and this is really important because in making the individual judgments in a high-quality way, you're then able to make cumulatively better, larger decisions. Sure. So as I ask the question, what leads to what causes or influences something else, and then I ask that and that and that, and then I step back from it, then what I've essentially done is I've looked at a much better, broader decision. And so high-quality decision at the small level leads to a better decision on the large level.
I've seen this done using an L-shaped matrix as well as the diagram that we see here. Do you have anything that you'd like to say to our viewers relative to which is the more effective way to use it? Or
well, let me show you an example. I have an example of what we'll call the graphical type, which has the arrows and looks like the spaghetti, if you will. Let's look at that. And I also have an example from the Jogger 2, but I don't have. I'll have to improvise with using the actual book. Now this is, by the way, the important thing on this particular one, if we can take a look at it, is notice that the issue is the issue surrounding the implementation of the business plan. This is a carryover. This is a carryover from the Goodyear example that we talked about before. So what they did is that they took what their header cards were, and then they said, well, what's the most important thing to work on first? And so they put it in the this circular pattern of the ID, and then asked the question, what causes or influences does means not clearly defined, if we can focus on that. Means not clearly defined, does it cause or influence the plan not being integrated? In this case, the plan not being integrated led to the means not clearly defined. And then we would ask that question, if we can pull back just a little bit, from here to here, and here to here, and so on and so forth, until all of the relationships are explored.
Then the in and out at the bottom of each of those blocks represent the number of arrowheads coming in.
That's right.
Or the number of arrows departing.
Innies and outies.
Okay.
Very simple. Okay? But now the thing that I want to start off with this is because one is that it's used in conjunction with infinity, and that's a very typical connection it's made. But also, this is a fairly small one. This is this is a fairly typical one of maybe 10 items or so. But remember not to focus on this. So oftentimes people get really blown away by it. They say, "Oh my God! I mean, look at all this stuff. How can you make sense of it?" But in fact, each arrow represents a relationship, and that's it.
A single relationship.
A single relationship. And as you're doing each judgment, you're then stepping back. Let me take a look at one that causes people to lose their breath. Okay? This actually comes from my hometown, which is Andover, Mass. And I was working with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Selectmen and the department heads. And what the background of this is that they did a survey of the entire community about what they wanted the community to be in the 21st century. And these were header cards that resulted from, that were created by the Board of Selectmen and by the department heads, taking this citizen input. And so this is what was going to drive the town of Andover into the 21st century.
You mean the government is actually listening to the voice of the customer?
Shocking. Shocking.
I've never heard of such a thing.
What our good friend Buzz Stupczynski, who's the town manager there, is a great practitioner and proponent. Now, people look at this and they say, "Whoa, this can't be. You can't manage this." But each one, this took about an hour and a half to do, based on some real rich discussions around each one.
Only an hour and a half for all that?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty good productivity. Now, if you look at that and come down to the essence of it. This is a blow up on another page in which we identify.
Page 29.
This is on page 29 of your handout. Is that what we're looking at is the driver being citizens treated as valued active customers. Quite a revolutionary concept. Okay?
I don't believe I've seen that used elsewhere.
Well, they seem to be warming up to it. And then also, this is interesting, an outcome of preserving and promoting the natural state of Andover. Meaning, in this case, it was very important for the whole issue of the beauty of the town and
sure.
environmental concerns, etc. So this became, what they're using this as is a key outcome and a key indicator for making progress. And this is being a key place to start. And if you focus on this, you can't go wrong. And if you measure it by this, you can't go wrong. So I mean, and everything in between obviously means something, but these are key lessons to bring
sure.
out of it. Okay. Now, Jack, you mentioned the matrix format. Some people literally get very put off by the apparent chaos of that. So if we can focus in on this, okay, if we can come in as tight as we can.
This is page 81.
This is page 81
on the new Memory Jogger 2.
That's right. So the question behind here was actually related to an Air Force example from the Air Combat Command, my good friends there, and they were looking at the relationship, in this case, the relationship between various program components. And so they were looking at the relationship between logistical support and customer satisfaction.
For the people who haven't noticed yet, if I may for a second, notice that the names of the various blocks that you would have had if we'd done it as we have over here on the previous page, if you can slide, thank you. You notice each of these has the various blocks like lack of awareness of impact, etc. Let's come back to the one over here on the right. You notice that these blocks are all listed here that's the same blocks that are listed across. You hadn't mentioned that.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why the center is blacked out, because there's obviously no relationship to be evaluated between customer satisfaction and customer satisfaction.
Right. No, that's a good point. And it's the exact same questioning process between these and these as you would in the circular pattern.
Exactly, yeah.
But for some people, it's easier to focus cell by cell rather than looking at this kind of mess of arrows as they might see it. And you simply do the tally at the end of ins and outs and total, etc. So this is another alternative people are put off by the larger, more graphical format.
So you have a choice depending on a person's learning or style or the way that they do things. You've given them at least two options in the way to do the interrelationship diagram.
Sure.
That's great.
Okay. And so that the ID, and by the way, is one of those things that I would suggest that you stick with. Because it's a little bit deceptive. I think people get sometimes scared by it. And by the way, it is a very can be a daunting process in terms of its completeness.
Let me ask you a question. I've always meant to ask you, and I never thought to until just this moment. Clearly, there's a very close working relationship between the affinity analysis and the interrelationship digraph. And I've seen many occasions where we'll start out with this huge number of items, and we condense it down using the affinity analysis and then use those header cards and develop the interrelationship between those header cards using the ID. I have never seen it go the other way. What I'd appreciate if you would comment on is, have you ever seen a situation, if you have, I'd appreciate if you describe it, where you start out with the interrelationship digraph and then move from that to the affinity analysis?
No, actually, that's not so uncommon. What I find interesting about that is no matter how you identify your key driver, and let's say it's through an ID, is that the affinity is a very good way to move into action planning as well. So for instance, oftentimes, in fact, that's a very good segue into the tree diagram. May I use it?
Branch out.
Okay, great. Did you say branch? Okay. We don't promise quality of humor, just quantity. Okay, so the tree diagram is interesting in that what it's asking is...
Let's see, this is page 4 of the handout.
This is page 4 of the handout. Thank you, my page reminder.
Right.
Is what are all the things that could or must be done in order to achieve a stated goal. And the tree diagram does that by systematically breaking down a goal into all its processes and tasks required for implementation. Now, all that's doing, if any of you have ever done a bill of materials, for instance, or a work breakdown structure.
It's a shred out.
Right. Yeah. It's just going down into the finer and finer details. Now, if I could come over to the graphic of the tree, is this level, as you're moving from the goal down to specific tasks, it gets obviously more specific. So you're starting at the general to get down to assignable tasks often. Now the question is, what are the general categories of activity you should be focusing on? These are tough. This is where people oftentimes get stuck, is right here. What I've been working with for the last year or two is to do what's called an action affinity. So let's say we have this as a goal. If this, let's say, came from an ID, which would be a natural place, is that you would just be starting out saying, in a brainstorming way, what are all the things that we could do? And using the action affinity, which is a kind of an abbreviated affinity, a little shorter, that to get the header cards, which then become your first level of detail of the tree to plan it out. And so in that case, it's a very natural fit between those two, and it gives you the hardest part. It gets you past the hardest part of the tree diagram. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just show an example of a tree diagram, and I really appreciate the chance to show these in a very tight fashion, because this is actually an example that builds on the ID that came out of Goodyear. So Goodyear used the combination of the affinity, the ID, and then the tree, which I think is a great combination. Now, this is not an eye test, I promise you. Let's just focus in on this right here, which is the goal. For Goodyear's purposes, it was the interaction of the planning groups, the fact that they were not integrating their plans, that was problematic, that could have been improved. And so all of these areas of activity here, if we could just bring that out just a little bit, These are the first level of detail right in here that they need to work on in order to accomplish this goal. And likewise, as you ask, how are we going to do that, you break it down in further and further detail. How, until I get down to some operational detail.
You know, it occurs to me that this might be an excellent way of helping to flesh out going from a mission and vision into your strategic objectives.
Sure. And I think that, see, the logic is the same.
Yeah.
It's always a strategy and how you're going to get there. By the way, one of the things that I found very helpful about the tree is, I don't know if a lot of companies, or if you in your company, Jack, they have the problem of distinguishing between levels of detail. For example, goals, strategies, objective, tactics, tasks. Well, oftentimes I've been involved in meetings where we spend a lot of time talking about which is which. And for me, this is not added value. I don't really care at what level it is as long as they're linked. And what I found helpful about the tree is that as you go from level to level, there are only two levels that matter. Is that I've got a goal, and then I've got a means to attack that goal. I've got, now this becomes a goal for the next level, and I've got now have means to attack this goal, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to be breaking down just goal, means, goal, means, goal, means.
So it's always a duality, and as you move progressively from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree, what was one thing once becomes the next higher item in the next lower level down.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like a, I'm not sure what
it's a cascade.
There, yeah.
What was a means before becomes now a new goal, because you now have to go
Make it happen.
get down and dirty with
Sure.
it. And so see, this is one of those things where I find that sometimes you get into these semantic discussions and you say, is it getting us closer to the solution of the problem? And I suspect not, oftentimes. Okay? So that's the tree diagram.
Okay.
Is this still okay? Is this still helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Just tell me if there's too much or too little.
You know, I'm not shy. You know, if there's a problem, I'll say something.
I thought you were shy.
Yeah.
All this time. Okay, let's take a look then at the next place we find ourselves is oftentimes we have to make choices. I mean, we have a tree diagram, all good stuff to make, and if we continue to expand our thinking, we can go into Never Never Land.
Yeah.
And so what we're really trying to do is focus our attention again. So the prioritization matrix on page 5, is that good? Did I say page 5?
Yes. That's
okay, great. Page 5 is focusing in on making choices. And so the key question, if we can focus on that, is given all of the critical factors in making a decision, what's the most important thing to do first? Okay? Now, let's imagine having a tree in front of us. We get all these great things to do. Well, what do we do first, if they're a matter of options? And the prioritization matrix compares the relative merits of tasks and issues or options based on known weighted criteria using a matrix diagram format. So
specifically an L-shaped matrix in this case.
Yes. And you're making choices based on a series of conscious steps. Number one, you're identifying criteria. Now, I don't know about in typical meetings that you've been involved in, but oftentimes criteria never even get raised. Everybody brings their own. You bring yours, I bring mine, and we apply them liberally. In fact, if you think about it, that really is what a hidden agenda is.
Yeah.
You know, you don't mean it. It's not it's not in an underhanded way, but subconsciously we bring those factors with us. So if we just did that, we'd be ahead of the game. Okay. And the second is that we now that we know them, we weight them, and now that we know them and we weight them, we apply them. And so let's show you a great example. This is also out of the Jogger 2.
Is this another real example?
And it's a real example from a company called Novacor, which is a chemical company up in Canada. Great people, very, very, very thoughtful and very wise users of the methods. And
Novacor sounds familiar. Isn't that a chemical company up in Canada?
Yes, you're a good listener too.
Oh, thank you.
It's a chemical company up in Canada.
They're not paying any advertising for this.
That's right. But the process that they went through, let me just give you a little bit of background. They're choosing new software for the company, corporate-wide, and so they had a graphics package, they had word processing, and a third that they were trying to figure out. Now, I don't know how long your company would take to make that decision. Like, I don't know how, but it's a time-consuming decision, and it's oftentimes less than satisfactory. So what did they do? They sequestered a group of 16 people for a week, 40 hours.
That's a lot of money invested.
That is a lot of money. But when you think about what kind of money gets invested into operating systems and backfilling and creating a consistent platform, that's a considerable investment as well.
You know, some of our viewers might be interested in terms of a cost comparison. You know, did Novacor do any comparisons on what it cost them to go through this exercise versus what it would have cost them if they hadn't gone through the exercise?
I don't think so formally, but time is money. And when you look at a 1-week decision cycle in choosing software, it was pretty wild because they described a process where on Monday the vendors on Monday they decided what was important to them. On Tuesday I think Tuesday, Wednesday the vendors came in and presented. And on Wednesday and Thursday, half of Wednesday and all of Thursday, they did comparisons. They went through this process. So I think it took them about a day and a half of actually taking what they had decided, what they had heard, and combined it into a conscious decision.
And you said there were 16 people?
16 people.
And I presume fairly highly placed people.
Yeah, and also a cross-functional team across the organization.
And they did that in a day and a half.
Right.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah. No, it's fast, but it's daunting when you look at what they created, because let's just see what they worked with. And this is on page 32 of your handouts. And this is also from the Jogger 2. And notice that right here, this is what's called the criteria matrix. And this, you just notice all these little fissures here. This is not an earthquake in California. This is actually partial.
You know, speaking of earthquakes in California, did you know that California, contrary to popular opinion, does have 4 seasons? It's earthquake, flood, fire, and drought, with an occasional riot. I just thought I'd mention that.
This is why you live there.
We call it that.
I love California.
So do I.
Okay. So we've got these fissures here which show partial. So this is showing you only 4 out of 14 criteria being compared. So they had identified on that Monday, Tuesday cycle 14 things they were looking for. Things like best use of hardware, ease of use, maximum functionality,
things that are
best
important
performance.
to them, sure.
Right. And you'll notice that these are listed here, and they're also listed here. So what you're doing here, and again, we're not going to get into the math or mechanics of it, but you are basically comparing how important is best use of hardware as compared to ease of use. And each of these figures represents a judgment, a consensus of the team. So what you've done is essentially at the end you have created a final score, if you will, of how each of these criteria, like best use of hardware, compares across all compared to all other criteria.
Well, in this case, the 13 other criteria.
That's right. So in this case, for example, best use of hardware is pretty small at 0.01, whereas maximum functionality was at 0.17. And so you would have 14 of these listed out.
You know, I would suspect, going back to the 7 QC tools, that if you were to apply the Pareto principle, that you'd find that 20% of those criteria represented about 80% of the weight.
Probably. No, I can't imagine why it would be any different. But what you're looking at, though, is a weighting of the criteria. Okay, so we now know that there are certain things that are very important. Now, how do we apply those important things to the options they do have? So we'll just call this program A, B, and C. We do draw the line at advertising at some point, who was being rated. But program A, B, and C were now going to be rated on basically 14 criteria. So you would have 3 options, program A, B, and C, compared to themselves, based on best integration, which is one of the criteria, based on this criteria here, lowest ongoing cost, so on and so forth, for in this case 12 more. So you have as many of these matrices, which is comparing options to options, as you do criteria. Right. So that sounds pretty daunting, 14 criteria. But what you're really looking at is each one of these cells represents a consensus. I mean, this is hard-fought battles in some cases about people who may be users of program B, talking to users of program A.
So this is really only the tip of the iceberg.
That's right.
This just is a summary.
That's right, exactly. It's a summary of a consensus. The final one in this, and again, these are all only partials based on the size of the Jogger 2, is that what we're looking at is we're now taking all of these options here, program A, B, and C, as they compare, as they rate across all of these criteria. And finally, you get a total across 14 criteria, and then you get basically a normalized value. So in this particular case, program C came out at a 0.49 relative to all of the criteria. So this became the clear winner, if you will. Now, what was interesting about this, as a footnote to this process, is program C came from an operating system and a company. 14 out of the 16 people had never used that program. So, so you know, when you think about stacked decks coming in with a decision already made, in this case, almost the entire group reversed itself based upon a conscious process of comparing deciding together what's important, deciding how important they were, and then comparing. That's a huge swing. Yeah. It was great. And that, for me, was one of the classic stories about why a method might add value. Because each of those, the supportability of the final decision. Okay? Fine? We're still on target?
I love it.
Okay. All right. The matrix diagram, where we often find ourselves is in not necessarily a choice situation, but maybe a deployment situation. So you've decided you need to do certain things. Well, how does it get out into the organization? Okay? And the simplest form, and the matrix diagram, by the way, is probably the most dynamic tool, most flexible tool. It's a box you can pour anything into. If you bought a car, you know, Consumer Reports, you know, it's probably one of the most widely used form of matrices. It's just an invaluable tool. So in a sense, this reflects on matrix thinking. And matrix thinking just says that there are comparisons between two things, and let's focus in on the interaction. Okay? So the key question is there a pattern of relationships between or among factors that will help or hinder successful implementation? So in other words, getting it out to the rest of the organization. Sure. And it compares one set of items against another set and identifies the strength of their relationship. Okay. And
for those of you who've used quality function deployment, what you're seeing here is the heart and soul of the center of the house of quality.
And by the way, this is on page 6. Right, John? Page 6.
It looks that way to me.
Yes. My numbering is getting much improving. Okay, so page 6 on your handouts. Now, the matrix diagram, again, is one of those tools that sneaks up on you because it's deceptively simple. Because you say, well, what can I find out about just the simple one-to-one relationship? Well, if you've ever been in a meeting where you come out of the meeting and you're just scratching your head saying, what did I just agree to do? And you find out you have a cumulative responsibility pattern that will put you under the ground within about a week of trying to pull it off. And we all suffer from that. So even something as simple as responsibilities coming out of some core tasks can save both the overall implementation of the plan and you. So this can save you. So listen up.
It sounds like Uncle Sam.
You got it. Okay, so let's take a look on page 36. And this is 35 and 36. This is from other friends up north of the border in Canada.
Sounds like you've done a lot of work up in Canada.
From Bell Canada. Actually, we have. And they're very good and...
sound very progressive, actually.
Yeah. Good thinking. I mean, you know, there's good thinking going on everywhere, but we find in several clients there that they're just outstanding innovators because they understand what we're trying to accomplish, and they fake it. They improvise. They bend it in their direction. Now, this is a very large matrix. Again, this comes from the Memory Jogger 2. This is on page 35 of your handouts. And what this is deployment matrix. And this starts out, let's focus in up here on these headings up here. This is, okay, here we go. TQM implementation tree. And what that is those things that we're trying to accomplish. And this is just, again, only a piece of a tree diagram that extended for probably another 15 items. And this is the relationship that these tasks had to these objectives that they were trying to achieve. So what you're trying to do is get the best fit. If you can just pull out a little bit, getting the best fit between what you say are your necessary tasks and the objectives you're trying to fulfill. So you're always doing the best thing on the most important items. And then all this does is it lays it out in terms of how we're going to measure our progress on these items, and then what's going to be our schedule across. And what it does is it creates an encapsulation. It creates a snapshot of what deployment's going to look like. Okay? Now, The second piece of that on page 36 is literally the other half as you're going to the right-hand side of a large matrix. Okay, and this is the same down here. This is the same tree that we looked at before, and this is the continued right side of that matrix. This is a pretty wide one, so we had to improvise here. And so here, for instance, you look at what the goals are. We talked before. If we can focus right in here, these are the goals in 94 and 95. And these are the responsibilities that are going to be associated with each one of those tasks, and then in turn, what is going to be the cost, and if appropriate, what is the status of that at any point in time. So what you've got is you've got the ability. First of all, you could stretch this thing. You could go on and on and on and on, depending on what's helpful. Okay, and what really adds value. But you'd be amazed at what this kind of summary of, no, I don't think you'd be amazed, because I think you know. Because you use your, aren't you Mr. Matrix?
Yeah, I'm a matrix kind of guy.
Yeah, matrix kind of guy. And you're, if you think about how plans tend to be communicated, they tend oftentimes in memo form, and often they're very nebulous, and people say, where do I fit in? And how does this connect with something else? Well, you put that in the form of one matrix, and you put that in a one-page memo, cover memo that summarizes, this is it. Now, that's good news, and it's also bad news, because when you put out plans that are rather nebulous, it also maybe shields you a little bit from criticism, because people don't know exactly what it entails, and so they may be holding back.
It's generic enough so that kind of a cloud cover.
Yeah, and sometimes that feels pretty good. When you put it in the form of a matrix or even a tree, you find yourself laying yourself open as creators.
Yeah, absolutely.
People say, but wait a minute, what's going on here? That doesn't link with this, and your logic is kind of laid bare. So, I would hope that people, don't take that as reason not to use it, but rather that that's a good thing to have happen. And I think in our organization, as we move to more participation, that is a good thing, and more consensus. Okay?
I would agree.
All right.
Before you get into the next tool,
yes.
Let me ask you a question. Not meant to be a surprise, but something I've been thinking about. When you went through and talked about the prioritization matrix, I remembered that the original 7QC tools, the new tools, as they were called, had a thing called a matrix data analysis chart.
Right.
And that was replaced by the Memory Jogger in the Memory Jogger Plus by the prioritization matrix.
Right.
Could you tell us a little about the decision that went into making that one-for-one switch?
It fit in the book. No, seriously. It looked better in print, so we decided to throw it up. Now, what happened was, it was interesting because we saw the original intent of the MP tools as being mainstreaming planning. So it's not in a planning office, it's not for the gifted few. And what happened with the matrix data analysis, if you're familiar with something called conjoint analysis in marketing research.
A conjoint, isn't that a prison?
What can no guarantees. So now I completely lost my train of thought.
You should talk about conjoint analysis.
Conjoint analysis, which is a real thing. And what it did was it was a very good and very sophisticated form, in fact, that required computerization to really make it work, of understanding things like buying patterns and the weighting of buying patterns. And we tried for a couple of years to simplify to make it like the remainder of the tools. And quite honestly, I gave up because I could not make it a like item. And so all of a sudden, it was like, if you can picture like a snake swallowing a pig. Can you picture this? Okay.
I'm trying not to, but I'm afraid I am.
You've got this thing running along, the affinity, the ID, the tree, and it's pretty common. And then all of a sudden, you've got this big thing right in the middle, and it requires computers, it requires sophistication.
Yeah.
This doesn't fit. So we tried to work at it to simplify, but then we got so far away from it, we said this doesn't make any sense. So the choice was how do you make choices? And so then we pushed back. Actually, what we do in the prioritization matrix is a modification of something called analytical hierarchy process by Thomas Sadi, Dr. Sadi, and which is great stuff. And it's just a somewhat simpler method for that. So we turned to that to give us choices.
Terrific.
Okay.
Now, out of curiosity, in Japan, where the concept of the 7 QC tools or the new QC tools, the 7M tools, the new QC tools developed. Are they still using the matrix data analysis chart, or have they switched over because of what you've done to the? I'm serious.
I would love to think that they reversed engineered and took it back and said, such a good idea, we'll do it. But you know, I'm really not sure. That's a very good question. But one of the things I do know is that they are teaching the 7MP tools to quality circles at that level. So I don't know if I want to infer from that has either been simplified or changed or eliminated based on the fact that it's moving out and down through the organization. I don't know. I wish I knew the answer.
I've always wanted to ask you that question, because I remember in looking at the first book on the new QC tools, that they had the matrix data analysis chart in there, and then your book came out and said, without any explanation of why the changeover, you had the prioritization matrices.
Yeah. Actually, there's a footnote in there if you read it really closely.
I probably missed that.
Okay.
Was it in Japanese?
No, it was in English.
Well, if it was in Japanese, I could have read it.
Okay. Do you want to finish up with the tools? How are we doing?
I see we're getting close to break time. Let me tell our viewers about how this is going to work. We're going to have a 10-minute break coming up here very, very shortly. At about 5 minutes to the hour, about 3 or 4 minutes from now, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back after the break and pick up where we left off. In between, you know, if you would like to, you know, write up some questions, call them in. I know that Mike and I would both love to hear from you. If you put the number up there, if they missed it before, there's the number. Talk to us about your questions on either the tools that Mike has already shared with us, or questions about the 7MP tools in general. But we want to hear from you. This is meant to be an interactive conversation. Don't let my feeble attempts at humor put you off. I promise not to play games with you. Give us a call, and I'd love to chat with you. Mike would like to chat with you to make sure that as you walk away from this telecast at the end of the 2 hours, that you feel comfortable, that you've gotten your time's worth and your money's worth, and that this was an event that was well worth participating in. We've only got 2 or 3 minutes left, Mike. Do you want to give us kind of an initial look at the PDPC?
Let me in fact try to. I'd like to ideally wrap up the descriptive piece as much as possible before, and then go into more purpose and some advanced process. Oftentimes when we're at the deployment phase, you get down to a responsibility, and you're at the edge of action, and you have to now take responsibility for creating a more detailed plan. And often we find ourselves in very new and unexplored territory. So how do we, for example, if you've ever been asked to put together a budget that you've never done it before, yet you're asked to give a very, very specific budget and allocation to it. There's something called the PDPC, or Process Decision Program Chart, which is, let's just refer to this as a form of contingency planning.
Why don't we call it page 7?
We'll call it page 7 too. It's on. You'll find it on page 7. And what we're looking at is answering the question about the foreseeable obstacles and appropriate responses involved in any implementation plan, where various things can go wrong in a plan, and identifying countermeasures or a contingency. So in a sense, it's kind of like creative problem anticipation. And all it is to focus in on the graphical portion and pull back just a little bit, is that it is just a modified tree diagram in which we are looking at the tasks associated with achieving a goal, the problems associated with each of the tasks, and reasonable countermeasures to respond to those. And what you're doing is by anticipating problems, you're actually leading to the potential for breakthrough.
I'm going to tell you, you're not aware of this. For the last 6-7 months, I've been working with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, working on integrated product and process development. And one of the things that we were looking at was the development of a Mars rover. So when we set down our first vehicle on Mars, you know, what should it look like? How should it function? And we used the PDPC. In terms of the, you know, what are the tasks? What are the, you know, what kind of soil? How are we going to test it? Where are we going to test it? The problems, the countermeasures. And they were very excited. This is the first time this particular team had been exposed to PDPC.
Really?
And I want you to know they really picked up on this immediately. It was a terrific way, your first interplanetary use of PDPC, if you will.
And that's great because it's so simple. And this, by the way, is along with the affinity, the one that people often gravitate to.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to break? And
yeah, I think it's just about that time. To our leaders in the control room, looks like we're ready to go. And so let's go ahead and take our break, and it's about 5 of right now. We'll come back in about 10 minutes, and we'll be chatting with you about the remainder of the 7 management and planning tools, along with our special guest, Michael Brassard. And we're still looking for those calls, and don't disappoint me, folks, because I'll come out there and get you if you don't call.
He's not kidding.
We'll take our break now and see you in about 10 minutes. Hi, we're back again. This is part 2 of Continuous Improvement Television on Monday, July 11th, 1994. My guest, Michael Brassard of Goal QPC. During the break, we had a couple of things happen. One, we got a phone call from Rochester, New York, a question for Mike, and Mike will talk about that in just a minute, both the question and the answer. But before we get into that, I wanted to show you something that Mike and I were talking about. If we can get the overhead camera here for just a second. What we're focusing on here, if I'm going to pull back for a wide shot here, you don't have a copy of this because I just acquired this recently. Folks down in the corner here, the Quality Associates in Fallbrook, California, sent me this, and it's a, so far as I can tell, a prehistoric interrelationship digraph. And if you can come in close on some of these as I point to them, Here we have a thing called the Preliminary Hunter Review Board, the PHRB, and some of the other major events, as I see over here, is the Hunter Readiness Review, and
I think obtaining blessing.
Obtaining blessing of the great God is very important. There's only one in and one out, but you know, sometimes you have to go for more than just quantitative activity. Very important here is the Critical Hunting Review Panel, the CHIRP. But you can see over here that our discussants are saying that the consultant assures me that it will improve our hunt effectiveness and keep us ahead of the Cro-Magnons. That's always an important criteria. Whereas his counterpart here says, I just want to kill something and eat it. That sounds like some folks in industry that I've talked to. Yeah. But at any rate, I think it's now time to come back to talk about more serious things. Mike, would you tell us, please, about the phone call that you got from Rochester, New York, which happens to be my hometown, and what the question was and your perspective on the response.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate the question, and really it's related to, let's go back to page 35 of the matrix diagram, and there was a question about, if we can zoom right in here, is these things called LQC objectives. And there was the relationship of these to the tasks associated with implementing total quality. And this is a key factor in the deployment process, is relating it back to the wider organizational objectives. The question related to where did these come from? And the thing about a matrix is that it's a box you can put anything into. And the only thing that matters is that it's important stuff. And in this case, these were business objectives for the division, for the unit that was doing this activity. And so they were ensuring that there was alignment between what's here and what was decided as to support total quality implementation, and what was organization-wide important to the success of the business. If we found out that there was a lack of alignment, a lack of strong connection, then we'd have to think twice about whether or not this, which seemed like a good idea and good tree or good creation at the time, may be questionable. Okay, so that's this can come from anywhere, and that's where the matrix is not only from another tree, for instance, but it can basically from a set of objectives that a management group has put together.
You know, it occurs to me, Mike, that we hadn't talked about it, but what those symbols represent. You know, folks that are accustomed to using the 7M tools or QFD, Quality Function Deployment, are already familiar with what those symbols stand for, but you might want to make reference to those for people who are new to the topic.
Yeah, what these symbols are in actuality is not the most critical thing, is that they're visual representations. And so the traditional symbols are double circle for strong, single circle for some, and a triangle meaning a weak or possible relationship. And when something is blank, there's obviously no connection. And the values, the 9, 3, and 1, are also traditional ones brought over from the QFD application. The important thing is that there is a visual representation of patterns. And all of this is about pattern recognition. And so whether or not we're talking about a matrix in which you're stepping back to see what's the overall picture look like, or whether we're looking at an affinity and looking for patterns of ideas and themes, it's all about recognizing and letting things come out of the material that you have and that you're working with.
It gets people to seeing how other people are thinking about things instead of trying to have to read their minds.
Yeah, and I think that along with that is the process of stepping back from the decision, so that you're not so close to it, and that I think is
makes sense.
Another important piece. Just to close the loop that we started before on the PDPC, this is an example from an example on page 37 from a university about awarding unrestricted financial aid. It's from St. John Fisher College. This again is from the Jogger 2. And these items here are related to the tasks associated with awarding unrestricted financial aid. Again, you see this is a partial diagram. And what we're focusing down on here is what are the things that can go wrong about determining the amount for returning students, and these are the kinds of things can spin off of that. And these little cloud formations here are the reasonable things that can be done to respond to that. Okay? And so what you're doing often is that you're coming back to what are those things that we can now absorb back into the original plan. And the original plan can often be changed in a dramatic way based on anticipating what those problems are. And the problems can be a way to actually approach the original goal in a new and interesting way. Oftentimes, problems are identified only as negative. They're seen as something that should be avoided, when in fact they should be encouraged. In fact, a Japanese friend of mine said that either problems are gold to be mined or garbage to be buried. And I think that's obviously an important distinction.
Did he say that in English?
Yes, that's why I understood what he was saying.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Yep. One of the earlier visuals that you had on the, let me, is that the one?
PDPC?
No, that's not the one. One of the earlier visuals you had listed at each level what each of these things was. That's what I'm looking for.
Right.
Yeah, what I'm going to ask you to do is take your pen and identify on this what each of these are, task, problem, countermeasures, so that the folks that are watching us can do this, annotate their visual, their page in the same way.
This right here is the goal.
Here, why don't you, I don't know if that shows up. Yeah, I guess that shows up okay.
This is the goal. And these items here are the, I'll just bracket it this way.
Okay.
These are the steps or tasks. And you'll notice that these are in actually two levels of detail. Typically, the PDPC varies either between 1 or 2 levels, this being one level, this being a second, more specific level. Generally, I recommend actually to stay at the higher level. I mean, that seems oftentimes to be adequate. And you break out areas by exception when there are problems related to it. These next would be, if these are tasks, these are problems connected with the completion of those tasks. And then down here are what we'll call countermeasures, or reasonable things to do in response to the likely problems you identify.
Okay, now on that previous page, the one we were just looking at a second ago, this is page 37 that's on the screen right now, but on page 7, where we first saw the process decision program chart, you had a series of X's and O's. I don't think you commented on that.
No.
Would you put, for example, an X or an O for each of these countermeasures and explain to our viewers what they indicate? Okay.
In fact, next to each one of these, you could put a reasonableness or desirability kind of measure. So if I say that increasing enrollment research right here on existing data is a very likely, reasonable, and helpful thing to do, I might put an O next to that. And if I said additional quantitative data is something that's desirable, I would put an O next to that, and so on and so forth. Now let's say if I said over here about surveying students is something that we don't have the resources for and we've done too many surveys, whatever it might be, we might put an X next to that as being something we would choose not to pursue. And whereas participating in state and federal financial aid organizations might be something very reasonable and desirable.
And the purpose of applying these X's and O's on the countermeasures is
to make choices. You know, the ones with the O's are the ones that would be then, and this is the key portion here, would then get built in back into the plan.
Would that make this the? Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
The ozone layer.
No, I wouldn't think so.
Okay.
I wouldn't state it that way anyway. Not and admit that I said that.
I can't admit I asked the question.
Okay, so what we're looking at then is we're looking at how do countermeasures get absorbed back into the original plan.
Very good. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks for asking. And the last one that we'll do is the activity network.
Did you ever respond to that question from Rochester?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I hope I did adequately. And it's not a flip answer. I mean, there are many sources for those the input into the matrix, and it can literally be a list that somebody came up with in a management group. It doesn't have to be one of the other management and planning tools. And I'd like to wrap this whole section with talking about the typical flow, and then flow into some other applications.
Okay.
We're also, by the way, in this process.
I just saw one of the
Okay.
charts coming up. You think you saw spaghetti before?
Okay. The activity network diagram is, if you think about the end result of a plan, you have to tie resources and time to that. And so now we're going to get very close to what we generally refer to as a PERT chart, or critical path method. And there are some subtle changes to it that are beyond what we need to talk about today. But it's asking about what the total time is necessary to complete a project given the task that can be done sequentially and performed simultaneously. So what it's going to do for us, the activity network diagram, is that it's going to, based on a linking and calculations, are going to identify what is going to be our, quote, critical path, and also some efficiencies that we can gain by doing things simultaneously.
And it says here that the critical path is the longest timeline from the beginning to the end of a project.
Right, which is the quickest time that you can actually get the job done.
To go from the first step to the last step.
Right.
Okay.
And this is one that's strongly supported by software. It's been around since the
1957.
That's right. And the critical path and the PERT chart were developed almost simultaneously.
Actually, the critical path method started, and that was what we call a deterministic approach, where you only have one estimate of the time required for each activity, whereas the PERT, the program evaluation and review technique, was probabilistic, and they would have a most likely, least likely, most optimistic kind of evaluations. And they used a thing called an alpha, it was a beta distribution to calculate what the probability is of making it through that entire network in X days or hours or whatever it might be. And they found that they reverted back to the CPM instead of PERT, because it was hard enough to get a single estimate of how long it took to do a given step, let alone get people to give you 3 estimates. Yeah. So that's why the CPM has become more popular. And
I think that issue of credibility is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't have that, it just goes down the tubes, and people file it away and then say, well, I'll do what I was going to do anyway, and I'll see you in 6 months.
Right.
Let me just end this whole section of description with this typical flow. And I'd like to just, we're not going to go through it step by step, but just focus in on what are the products of each of the tools and the fact that they can be linked. So one thing I would hope that people don't walk away with is saying that, oh my gosh, every time I face a decision, I have 7 tools to face. Well, consider this to be a roadmap. Let's say this is the freeway system around LA. Well, no, forget that. Never mind. Another one. But it has lots of on-ramps and exits. Okay. And so you can enter this process and exit it at any point. And if we can keep that in mind, then we can use them to advantage. Okay, so the affinity and the ID are both creative processes, in the affinity being a very creative and wide open, the interrelationship diagram being a more logically linked question. And what it's going to identify is dominant themes and driving causes. 2 very different products, and you'll notice there's a linkage there oftentimes. And it flows down into the tree diagram, which is going to create either optional tasks over here. If we could just zoom in just a bit more. There, that's fine. Thank you. And we have optional tasks from the tree, and also the required tasks come out of that. Sure. And so the question is, what do we do next? Well, at any point in this process, you can exit and go to a more traditional method if that's what is to be supported and that's what people are comfortable with. All we're saying here is that there's a natural fit. So when we come down to the prioritization matrix, we have selected tasks. Coming out of the matrix diagram, we often end up with patterns of responsibility and relationships. So now we have to allocate resources, and this is this whole piece down here in relationship to either the PDPC in uncharted waters and activity network in the more known categories, more stable environments.
Could you give our viewers an example of what you mean by unknown and known?
Well, let's say, for instance, we're entering a new market. And I have never introduced a market into the retail environment. Okay. And what we're really talking about is we're looking at something where we don't have a lot of experience base. We don't have experience, but yet we're expected to come up with a very detailed plan. So that's uncharted waters. So how do we get the best shot at creating a credible plan in some place we've never been. Okay, and that's what I mean by known and unknown.
Okay.
So the known tends to be,
sense.
you know. So what I would like, if we could, I'm really concerned at this point in the history and the evolution of these tools, and in total quality in general, about the whole issue of being mechanically driven.
Okay.
And what's the purpose? And I think your question before about how do we link these together? How do we make sense out of them? When to use them? It really relates to what are we trying to achieve as a business. And let's come back to the question from Rochester. The question was, where did these things come from, and why would you link them together? Well, oftentimes we find ourselves in unconnected activity. And that's what I think is a major source of problems for most of our organizations, is we're literally out of sync. And so the more we can make connections and linkage, the better off we are. So, but that needs to focus back on business purpose. I would never recommend using a tool, unless it answers a legitimate and tough question in the business objective.
Absolutely.
Okay? And that's where I think that people need help. So what I would like, if we could, with your permission, I'd like to give some examples of a company that started from the business objective and is flowing down to make some strategic changes. And they're using the tools to help them do that.
That sounds fascinating. Let's do that.
That be all right?
Sure.
Okay. So what we're going to do, let me just set this up if you could. This is based on an actual business case. It's a fictitious company, but it's an actual business case of a company in the Midwest that are making a strategic change. Big stuff. Big time change for this organization. They're a uniform rental company, and they are trying to go from renting uniforms to their customers to expanding their identity in the eyes of those customers. Because as you know, customers that you have are much cheaper to keep and to sell new things to the new customers.
Absolutely.
So they started from that premise, and they started with the top group of managers, the CEO, VP of marketing, VP of sales, MIS distribution, and this was the core planning group. And they basically said is what are all the issues that we need in order to expand our base, our selling base to our existing customers. So what they've done before what you're going to see is they have done an affinity diagram, and they have put all of the issues into the hopper. And what they've come up with is they've come up with a set of header cards that are the driving business issues in order to begin to make this strategic change. So what you're picking up with is going from the affinity diagram to the ID. The ID.
Okay. Now, do we have some actors here in the studio that are going to come in?
No, we're going to see a videotape.
A video?
A videotape.
A video on video. That's terrific.
It's actually from a tape called the Integrated Management and Planning Tools tape. And
let's hold it so the folks can see what that looks like. Could you all focus in on that?
Okay.
There you go.
It's about a 45-minute tape that was produced at the end of '93, and it was in response to people asking, show me this in a business environment, one business case taken start to finish. That's what it is. Okay, so enough said. Let's take a look at our team. In this case, it's the CEO, the VP of Sales, VP of Marketing, and also the MIS Distribution Director. And let's pick it up with the start of the interrelationship diagram. The one thing it doesn't do is to prioritize among them. In order to do that, they're going to use the interrelationship diagram, which finds the cause and effect relationship among each header card and all of the others, in order to identify drivers to focus the rest of their planning.
So what's the question we're going to use for the ID?
Well, the last time I did an ID, we asked, is there a cause or influence relationship between the two issues? And if so, which is stronger?
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, but that's really what we're looking for.
So is everyone agreed?
I think so.
That does sound good.
All right. Is there a cause or influence relationship between build service rep skills and knowledge and create service reps incentives?
I don't think they cause each other.
Or influence.
Me neither.
Okay, so no arrow. What about build service rep skills and knowledge and develop an order fulfillment system that can grow with the business?
Again, I don't see the relationship.
No, again.
Well, this has been easy so far.
Let's see. How about with this and understand and expand the focus of the customer perception of Century?
Well, their perception would undoubtedly influence what the service reps need to know. You know, more interpersonal skills if the customer doesn't feel comfortable, that sort of thing.
That's true.
So then we'll draw an incoming arrow back to our build service rep skills. So our biggest influencers, not surprisingly, deal with understanding our customers more completely.
Hey, you know, we've got a lot of research on our existing customers, a little bit on their employees. We can look into that and see how we can put it into context to our new product line and approach.
Our customer service people should have some more ideas on how to get, you know, more information. They definitely should be part of our team.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
You know, we've got some information in MIS too that might be worth taking a look at. I think somebody from our group should be on that team also.
Margot, could you be in charge of getting that team together? Oh, and let's get the competitor information in there as well, okay?
You know, it's really interesting that both the service reps issues have 0 outgoing and 7 incoming.
Well, I think that's key. I mean, they're going to be our frontline people. They've never had to deal with selling before because they've, you know, their jobs are delivering uniforms.
Yeah,
but
you're
now
right. I mean, let's face it, if we don't handle these service reps issues right, it could kill the whole program.
No, we have to look very hard at the service reps because their roles are really going to be changing here. Well, why don't you get some other people involved and tree it out to see what it's going to take, okay?
Looks pretty messy, doesn't it? Some people think it looks like spaghetti or a spider web, but it's really very simple because each of these lines represents a cause and effect relationship between 2 issues. And when you pull back, it's a wide-angle view of all of those relationships. Now, this team has uncovered that the customer has a driving effect on many of the other issues, and that's going to be dealt with by another team with existing data. The service rep issues, on the other hand, are very tricky. They've been around since the founding of the company, and they're key to the success of this particular program. So they're going to be carried forward to a tree diagram. Oh, okay.
I was just going to say, now back to Ravioli Jack and Spaghetti Mike.
Yeah. Well, if we could just take a look at what they saw in that tape.
This is on page 9.
This is on page 9 of your handout. You've got to pull back because it's pretty large. But again, it does look daunting and it does look overwhelming. But really, the whole in and out pattern is going to be the dominant lesson that you take away from it. The thing I want to point out is what they did is that they used this intelligently, because what they did, you'll notice there were a lot of things around the competition and the customer, et cetera, different ways of looking at the customer. Very important. But what they decided, though, is that this was being handled by another process. What they chose to do, and this is not necessarily the traditional way, but it's a possible way, is to go to the dominant outcomes, which is where the greatest number of arrows coming in, and focusing in on that. They made a conscious decision to do something different or out of the ordinary for a typical ID process. Okay? So if we can just talk about that wise use, is that, see, they focused in on what they wanted to do. They wanted to make sure that they used new methods and new combinations of people for places in which they really needed a turbocharge of either creativity or completeness. And what they did with this process is that the customer piece was already being taken care of. And so what they came to the conclusion that what they really needed to work on was that customer service piece, customer service rep.
But Mike, let me ask you a couple of operational questions for our viewers that may not be totally familiar with some of the standardized approaches that are used here in conjunction with the ID. I noticed that some of the boxes have a double margin, or a double, what do you call
double
the outside?
Box, yeah.
A double box, and that some of them are double hatched that have lots of outs, and some of them are double hatched that have lots.
They all have all double outs here
Yeah.
are double hatched, double boxed, that indicate that those are drivers. That's
Okay.
how this group decided to highlight the ones that were dominant drivers.
Gotcha.
But and people have used starbursts. They've used different color ink.
Just to identify.
Just to identify.
Okay.
And the bold box, if you will, for the incoming up here is just another way to designate that these are key things to look at.
Gotcha.
You could have written the word driver up here. You could have written the word, outcome up here, driver down here.
Sure.
See, the point is to use what is going to what's going to add value, and that's where I find that often when you get into a mechanical view of it, you begin to lose that. Okay, let's talk about where this team went.
Okay.
With this, the team was now poised in the direction of really working to support the customer service reps. So what they did is and which we won't see, by the way, we won't have time today, but they created a tree diagram of all the things that they needed to do to support and change a customer service rep from a deliverer of rental uniforms to a sales agent.
But in the tape itself, it actually does that, huh?
Yes.
That's great.
And you're really trying to understand that you want to see the complete picture, because they've been struggling with this particular issue of who and what these service reps should be for years, literally. So what they did is that they created this tree diagram that created the necessary tasks, and then what they did is that they, as part of that, a piece of it was to go into various marketing options that would support the service rep. And so they were concerned that they would not make the best choices because they were not really a marketing company. So how were they going to decide on the best blend of marketing strategies? So what's interesting about it is over here in another group, they were working on test market cities and choosing the best test markets. So that activity was going on.
Oh, so this is a national firm, even though it's located in the Midwest. You hadn't mentioned that.
No, they are national.
I'm just trying to figure out who it is.
No, please don't try to. They were trying to really do a good job at test marketing, and they were working hard at that. But now what they wanted to do was they wanted to come to the conclusion about what would be the best blend of marketing options given the test markets they were going into. So in comes the work of another team, combining it with the work of this team that's working the 7 management planning tools in this strategic issue. So what I'd like you to do is to rejoin a different team. Some of the same people are on it, but I believe, if I remember correctly, the CEO is no longer a part of this team, and it's now included other people, like a service rep and like a regional manager. So the most important thing you start off with, whether it be this tool or other tools, is starting with the right people. Yeah, surprise, surprise.
Okay. How do we know, for example, why the CEO is no longer with it?
I think that's a business-by-business decision.
Okay.
There are different styles. For example, there are hands-on CEOs and hands-off CEOs who want to be involved in virtually everything. And in this case, the style of the CEO was that it was a handoff monitored process and getting information. And in fact, getting these is a terrific way to communicate to people who were not involved in the initial process. And so this is no exception where you would have the CEO being kept in touch with it.
Okay, so in this case, the CEO felt comfortable after the first round that his position, his approach to the subject had been fully documented in the initial study, and he felt comfortable handing it off to some of his other people, and he went on to more strategic issues.
And they were working on the right things. I think that's a big part of not letting go is not having confidence that the right issues are being dealt with by other people in the organization. Gotcha. Okay? So let's take a
I just want to say, folks, we've only got 25 minutes left. We're halfway through this second hour, and I don't have a lot of money, but I'm going to spend what money I've got and come out and get you if you don't start calling us. I mean, the telephone's up there, and the whole purpose of this interactive facility that we've set up is to help you to ask questions as they occur to you, instead of having to wait and call me after I get back to California or to Arizona, or to call Mike when he gets back to Methuen. While it's clear in your mind what your question is, there's other people who probably have the same question but don't even realize that it's formulated into the question that you have. Call it in, please. We really need to hear from you.
Okay, and we have no agenda. We're here to answer your
You can tell we're not doing this from a script.
Okay, no one would write a script like this.
Like this, that's right.
So why don't we rejoin the team now that is going to now do a T-shaped matrix to combine the results of the best blend of marketing options with the test market information. Okay, so let's look at the second segment.
The service reps have responded pretty well to offering different rental options, but they weren't aggressive.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How do we want to use this information to see which options fit?
Well, you know, all of them came out pretty strong in the prioritization matrix. Why not use them all?
Use them all in each of the test market cities?
Well, no, I was thinking of using a combination, say 3 in each city.
Yeah, and the information from the bottom half of the chart could give us our combination for each city.
What if of the 3 we choose one as the main marketing option, back it up by the other 2, and then that way in the end we'll know which combination was most effective in a given situation? What do you think?
A good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we could make the first option 1, the second option 2, and the third option 3.
Yeah, I think that's a good
Okay.
idea.
Okay. Then let's get started with Nashville.
I think since Indy has a younger population and higher salaries that they'd be more receptive to a video.
Yeah, it looks like the rep's potential for presentation is strong there, too.
I agree
Yeah.
with that.
You know, it would be interesting to see how the same combination works for 2 different cities.
Well, Roanoke is the only other city that we chose to use a videotape as a first option.
Well, that'd be interesting to try, since Roanoke is smaller and Indianapolis is bigger.
I agree with that. Looks like we've got some good mixes.
Okay. Actually, the composition of that team included also an outside person from an ad agency. And I'd like to just focus on this T-shaped matrix because it has some interesting components to it that I think a lot of people miss. Let's take a look on this is on page 10 of your materials. And these, by the way, all of these materials are out of the viewer's guide that goes with that tape, with the Integrated Management and Planning Tools tape. So let's just take a look at this lower portion. That includes both in this case, the test market cities and the characteristics of those test market cities here. And you'll notice that there are numbers in here. Numbers, see, real numbers, real data.
Those are definitely real numbers.
Those are real numbers. And those came from the people who were working this issue simultaneously as to what were the characteristics and demographics of those various cities. So, and you'll notice on these lines here where you have pluses and minuses and zeros, they are the assessment of the team. You'll notice there's a legend down here that says strong, good, and fair. Well, the team was essentially making a judgment about, in this case, local management and service reps in each one of these test market cities. They were combining, essentially, subjective judgment with facts. Oftentimes, matrices are seen as just repositories of subjective information, when in fact they can be used very nicely to combine both data and judgment. Okay? Now, that's not to diminish the importance of judgment. A consensus decision, and this is true, what I've learned from the Japanese, is that when consensus is reached and represented by a symbol, that's extremely important. Okay? Now, the top half of the matrix, if you see what has happened, is there is information at the bottom half, and that information is now going to inform, this information here came from a tree diagram, a part of the tree diagram. These are marketing options. And now we're going to do the best blend of strategies across all of the test markets. It's using the characteristics and what the strengths and weaknesses of each test market to determine what affects the top. And that's I think that's a very interesting and legitimate use of the tool. Oftentimes we only turn it into a summary document when in fact one portion of the document can affect the outcome of the other portion. And I think wise use will bring that out. Okay. Have you used the matrix very much in your own T-shape?
I'm constantly using not only the L shape and the T shape, but recently we got into the Y shape matrix. And for those of you who have not used a Y-shaped matrix, let me deviate for just a second.
Can I do it right on here?
If you'd like, sure.
Okay, but now, let me just point out what would happen is you'll notice, and do you want to draw right on here? Because what you cannot do is you cannot show comparisons between items here and items here directly.
Exactly.
In a T-shape like this. Okay?
So
what would you do with
yeah,
that?
what I would do is I would take, for example, the main stem.
Why don't you draw right on it?
Yeah,
Okay.
Forgive me. It's just,
Go ahead.
I'm just kind of rigid.
Please.
Flexible but rigid.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we've got the test cities down here, like Nashville, Roanoke, Cincinnati, etc. And with a T-shaped matrix, over here on the right, we've got the media we're going to use, the catalog, the local TV, the brochure, direct mail, videotape, and finishing the T-shaped matrix that we've got there. We've got over here on the left, we've got the areas of concern like market share, local management, demographics, service reps, etc. Now, as Mike just pointed out, we have one L-shaped matrix right here, another L-shaped matrix right here, and we're able to relate this main axis, if you will, of the T-shaped matrix with, let's say, if we'll call that X, with the Y axis, and we can relate X to the Z axis, but we cannot relate X and Y. So what we do is we bend it just a little bit, make it almost three-dimensional, so that now our Z is up here and our Y is up here, and suddenly we have an opportunity to relate the Z and Y axes. So now we can make three comparisons, not just the two that we had before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if it was determined that it was necessary to do a relationship between the two top halves of the T matrix, this is an option, and that is to go to the Y-shaped matrix. Yeah, and I've used that on a number of occasions. Some people feel very comfortable with it, others less comfortable, but it's I think a terrific opportunity to be able to use this as necessary.
Well, this is sometimes difficult for those who refer to as spatially challenged, and sometimes have trouble picturing that other dimension. But it is very helpful to show that those.
It's interesting you should mention that, because I've been spatially challenged all my life to excess.
Well. What this raises then is that there is a strategy in place, and what came out of this, and very quickly what we'll see is that the catalog came out based on work through a prioritization matrix that came out of this. These items were rated, and they were developed into the highest rated options, and then the catalog itself was seen as the most problematic. Now, oftentimes we have to try things when we're at risk, new things, and the same thing is true of these tools. Mm-hmm. This company had never done a catalog before. Now, this came out as a very highly rated option. I mean, this is something that was appropriate for every test market. So what do? So they actually had done a PDPC of producing their first ever catalog. If anyone out there has ever produced a catalog, first grade, first highest quality catalog, it's very expensive, and if you mess, it's a big miss. And so we're obviously not going to try to mess that up. Mm-hmm. And this is your first launch. The other thing that's not stated that you would see in the full case study is that this is a very competitive environment in which maybe this company had about a year to get this whole thing pulled off, and competition was waiting for them to mess up.
Gotcha.
Okay? So what we'll see is the last segment of this is them producing a final credible plan for producing a catalog, something of which they hadn't done. They did an intermediate PDPC to ferret out some of the anticipatable problems, if you will, and built that into the final activity network diagram. So let's take a look at what their final plan looked like for producing the catalog.
Let's do it.
Okay, does everyone agree with the connections we've made here? Are there any changes? Look pretty good?
Good. Nice flow.
Okay, now what we've got to do is list the time durations for all these tasks, how long each task is going to take. Let's start with the budget.
Yeah, we've got to go over the budget for the entire project, see what the other teams have come up with, what's going to take some money.
Well, yeah, but some of those teams aren't even finished with their work yet.
I think we need 3 weeks.
I'd say even longer than that.
Well, we've got a corporate budget meeting on the 25th. If we could tie it all together by then, that'd give us 21 days. Does that sound all right?
21?
Okay. We'll put 21 days down here then. Okay. Now we have select model agency.
Well, after you call around, it takes a couple of days to get their books and their tapes, and then a couple of days to review everything. I'd give it a week.
Why don't we say 5 working days?
Okay.
So the path will go to the pre-print prep, and then it's a straight shot to the end.
Boy, this goes to show you how the copy drives the whole project. I would have thought design would have been in the critical path, but I guess getting the copy points right consumes a lot of time.
I can't believe this project is going to take 197 days. That's over 6 months. Can we tighten up anything?
I think it's interesting when you look at the end result of that, tool is what they were doing is that they were producing what was an acceptable yet what seemed to be a much larger job than they ever expected coming out of that. And that, in a sense, is a definition of credibility, is when you can look at it, examine the rationale and say, yeah, that makes sense. In fact, a lot of times the lack of rationale is where people say, yeah, sure, or okay, yeah, we'll see how it works. I'll sit back and watch. So, and that's a very different feeling.
You know, one of the things that I've been very impressed with in watching the videos, which are very well done, and I think Jim Amatulli and his crew in Cincinnati deserve a lot of credit for the quality of those videos, as well as some of the earlier ones he's made for Gold QPC, is the process that these folks went through using these 7M tools to help themselves to efficiently, but not at the expense of detail, figure out exactly what they ought to do in a very unemotional, unbiased way. It would seem to me that there probably ought to be some kind of approach or standardized, uniform process that exists to help people to use these 7M tools to their greatest advantage.
You know, I think that's a critical point. I think one of the things about that typical tool flow that I showed before is that it is only typical. So you know, you have to be careful about being in a lockstep kind of sequencing and linkage of tools.
Have you developed anything else that would help people to find their way through this maze?
You know, for the last couple of years, I've been working with something really geared towards improving something pretty simple. And on page 12, ultimately, what we're after in your materials, we're after this. We're after collaboration. And all it is the blending of the talents, knowledge, and perspectives of 2 or more people in support of a common purpose.
Do you know that was once a war crime during World War II, collaboration? Where the Allied people might be dealing with the enemy?
Well, I guess there was supposed to be not a common purpose, and it became one.
I would guess you're right.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd mention that.
But it is one of those things that we're all striving for.
Absolutely.
In our organizations. And you know, when you say why should we do anything different? Well, collaboration is one of those things that people have found that really makes a difference between a turbocharged organization and one that's just putzing along. Now,
That's a high-tech term?
putzing, yeah.
Putzing along.
Yes, it's a TQM term. So what, now I apologize for having given this a name, because I think we have actually done a disservice in some cases by naming something and people say, so somebody introduced a new acronym. But let me introduce one more acronym.
This is an acronym, okay.
Well, it is. It's called context. And the only reason why it's that is because it looks that way, is that it stands for contraction and expansion. And it means nothing more than that, but it's a thinking and planning process for doing collaborative PDCA. And all that means is people doing better as a group and as a team with the necessary and requisite knowledge. Now, what I found in working with the management and planning tools is that there are different tools that do different things for teams. And I hope that you noticed, in fact, as you were looking at that video, in fact, the purposes of the video is to allow organizations to compare themselves back to what they see as typical team activity. So if you were going to place yourself in their shoes, what would your meetings be like? Would they be like that? Would that follow that pattern? And so I'd like to just kind of almost describe a typical thought process that goes on and how the tools can be helpful. Okay? And again, this is just another way to look at context.
On page 14.
On page 14, thank you.
That's my job, folks, is making sure you know what page you're on.
Right. Thank you. Let's start at the top, which is chaos.
That used to be a congressional page.
And with chaos, which, by the way, sounds like a very negative term, but oftentimes it is simply being overwhelmed by possibilities and confusion about where to go. And so from chaos, though, comes a way to understand the nature of the chaos. You can't wrestle with it if you don't know what it is. And when you do, when you work at that first step of recognizing the nature of the change, it's that understanding what is the purpose. What is the goal that we're trying to achieve? And that is going to be the #1 determinant about whether any of these tools are going to be helpful. Okay? Now, defining the issues in the change is where things like the affinity diagram are most helpful. Okay? And the affinity is going to allow us to take this chaos and make some sense out of it.
Mike, if I could interrupt.
Yep.
I'm told that we have a caller.
Sure.
And I'd like to bring him on the air because we've only got about 6 minutes left. And forgive me for interrupting you, but we'll come right back to this. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, I'm calling from Rochester.
Are you the same person that called before?
Nope.
No.
Why not?
Hi.
Would you identify yourself, please, just for the audience?
Sure, this is Julie.
Hi, Julie. What organization are you with?
Eastman Kodak.
Oh, terrific. Okay, I used to live right around the corner. Go ahead.
Just on page 11, I think we're looking at a network, an activity network.
Yep.
What are the other numbers next to the dates, like 21 days under budget and then 021, 021?
Okay. Okay, let's go back to that. Okay, so the question, I hope everybody heard it, was related to page 11 of our materials, which is the activity network diagram. And let's just focus on one. It's as good as any. On, let's say, item 13. And so where it says here, for example, it took 14 days, these are what are referred to as the earliest start, earliest finish, latest start, latest finish times. And this is a calculated figure that is connects each activity to every related activity. So, for instance, I can't start the next task that's going to be online here before the end of the 86th day. So that's going to be carried forward over to another task. And when you say down here, the latest start and latest finish is going to do the same thing. It's going to identify those linkages with other tasks that you want to take into account so that you don't delay related tasks. So these are calculated through a forward calculation and then a backward calculation.
And if I may add, Julie, you notice that this 14 days, that's the best judgment, a swag, if you will, of what the duration of this particular activity is going to be, 14 days. And it's that 14 that is the constant difference between the early start, early finish, and the late start, late finish. You know, there's 14 difference between the top two numbers and between the bottom two numbers, and it's this 14 days that it takes to complete this particular activity before you can go on to the next related activity.
You'll notice, too, that there is no difference between the earliest start, earliest finish, latest start, latest finish. And that's because this is on what's called the critical path, in which there is absolutely no latitude or slack within that schedule. So it has to be completed as scheduled in 14 days, or else the entire schedule is thrown off by the amount that it diverges from the schedule.
Exactly.
Okay? And so these are calculated as you move through the chart. This way, these top numbers are calculated in a rolling calculation, and these bottom figures, latest start, latest finish, are calculated in a rolling calculation going back through the chart. And so that's where these numbers come from. Anytime there is a difference between latest start and earliest start, you have some variation or some slack in which you can actually tolerate delays without delaying the project.
Okay, Julie, does that help a little bit?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for calling.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mike, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so why don't you go ahead and finish that context model?
Okay, let me just really go through this pretty quickly, because I want you to, if you could, feel this expansion and contraction mode. In this mode here, we're recognizing the nature of the change. We can use an affinity diagram to define the issues, thereby narrowing it down a bit. We can use the interrelationship diagram. In fact, I could write it in right here.
Good idea, yeah.
Okay. The affinity, pardon my handwriting. The ID is a typical way to prioritize the change issues. Then we can't continue to get more and more refined and narrowly focused, because we now have to be expansive in our creating possibilities. So this is typically a tree diagram, can be used there to now take the focus of the ID and now expand our thinking. But once again, if you continue to only expand, you can get into very, very unrealistic options. Okay? So what we're going to do then is we're going to use this process now to narrow down our focus again so that we don't continue to be expansive. And we can do that using the prioritization matrix. And we can determine ownership using a straight matrix. Now, once again, we're in an expansion mode in which we're going to take that newfound ownership and we're going to expand the possibilities to anticipate problems, to identify obstacles, and create schedules. And so there we're going to use the PDPC and activity network diagram. These are typical ways in which you can both enter and exit this thinking pattern.
That is nothing short of brilliant. You invented this?
I guess.
Wow.
Expansion and contraction, I don't know.
I'm impressed. I would have called it the Venturi model as an engineer. I look at this, it looks like some kind of Venturi apparatus. But
also looks like a bellows. Okay, but
saw bellows.
But what it results in, though, is plans that work. And that's really what we're after, is plans that work. Start with chaos, end with plans.
Okay, folks, we're coming to the end of our show. I want to say thank you very, very much for the calls, for your attention, for your participation. I will have an opportunity to visit with you next month when my guest will be Pat Riley, the founder and chairman emeritus of the Council for Continuous Improvement. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please call in and let us know if you like the show, so that we can tell you next time in terms of continuous improvement how we're doing and suggestions on who our guests ought to be. And until next month, I'm Jack ReVelle, and this is Continuous Improvement.